How we choose to cut our vegetables should not be an overlooked part of the cooking process. Depending on the use case, it actually can have a massive impact on our dish. Today, I want to take a look at dicing onions. How fine do we really have to get? For example, is there a noticeable difference in the dish from what I, a home cook, would call a fine dice to what a Michelin star chef would call a fine dice? I feel like once a year I come back across this classic clip of Marco Pierre White super finely dicing onions, and it got me to thinking, realistically, is there ever a reason that a home cook would really need to do it this way? Are we missing out on anything, or at the very least, can we learn something from this technique? In theory, from a flavor perspective, the smaller we dice an onion means the more onion cells are burst, and thus the onion flavor is released much easier. And we can easily see that more onion juices are released with a finer dice. Additionally, from a texture perspective, a super finely diced onion will kind of melt into the background of the dish, where you may notice the flavor of the onion, but not the actual crunch of the pieces. So in today's video, I want to put this to the test. First, we're going to break down two different techniques, kind of a home cook dice versus that Michelin star dice, and then we're going to run through a couple of experiments to see what kind of impact a different dice of onion can have on our dishes. There are plenty of ways to finely dice an onion. I typically just use the traditional cross-cut method, so I'm going to show that. Starting from a whole onion, slice it in half, chop off the stem end, and remove the outer papery layer. To dice, first make thin vertical cuts down the onion. And I'm using my finger to guide the blade and keep those cuts as uniform as possible. Once the vertical cuts are made, lightly place the palm on the top of the onion and make two cuts inward. This is not necessary, but it does help make the bottom pieces slightly more uniform. Then again, using my finger as a guide, make thin cuts across the onion into a dice. Now, if someone asked me to dice them an onion, this is probably what you'd get from me, but as we'll see, it's not even close to as fine as what we get from the MPW method. Again, starting with a whole onion, slice it in half, chop off the stem, and remove the outer layer. This time though, we're going to quarter it and separate it into chunks. You roughly want 2 or 3 layers from the top piece, 3 layers from the middle, and then just save that other bit for something else. It's a little bit hard to dice. By separating it into chunks like this, we can flatten the onion a bit, which gives us so much control over that tiny dice. And this right here is kind of the big difference technique-wise. With this larger piece, it's hard to get super fine dice because everything kind of splays out as you're going through it. Whereas when you break it into these little chunks, you can push it and flatten it out and you get so much more control, leading to that fine dice. So continuing on, make vertical rocking or push cuts as thin as possible using the knuckle of the finger as a guide, and like before, just do the cross cuts in the same manner for a super fine dice. So I'll tell you straight up before we get to the fun science and experiments that just trying this technique definitely changed how I view and use onions, and I want you to give it a shot as well. So don't worry about doing it fast or perfectly. I'm sure Marco would throw me out of the kitchen for mine, honestly. Just try to get a fine as dice as you can and then store it in a container in the fridge and use them in various applications throughout the week. So I'll share a list of the things that I try these on at the end of the video. I honestly had a lot of fun just throwing finely diced onions in or on things that maybe I normally wouldn't. Some were winners, some not so great, though I definitely did try some pickled onions, and that was definitely a winner. That being said, if we are going to spend a couple extra minutes getting this super fine dice, what benefit do we potentially gain from a taste and texture perspective? And then maybe more importantly, what is the impact of that benefit? So before we talk onion impact, first a quick thank you to today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of inspiring and creative classes for anyone who loves learning. Personally, what I like most about Skillshare is that you grow with the classes. So when I first started using Skillshare over 3 years ago, I was trying to grow this YouTube channel and learn how to make better videos. So I took classes like the fundamentals of DSLR photography and storytelling for leaders. But now as I've grown and established myself, I'm focusing on different skills to learn. So one class I recently took was Thomas Frank's Productivity for Creatives, which is all about building systems to get more out of those other skills I've already learned. And the first 1,000 of my viewers to sign up using the code on screen or the link down in the description will get 1 month's free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. Thanks again, Skillshare, but now let's answer. How do onions provide flavor. This is a picture of onion cells, and inside these cells are strong smelling sulfurous molecules that give the onion its distinctive flavor and taste. The key sulfurous product is called the lacrimator, which is also the chemical responsible for making our eyes water. So when we cut or chew an onion, these cells are opened and release those flavor molecules. And really the one thing to know is that onion cells are a bit longer from root to stem than they are orbitally. So in this past video of mine, from a flavor perspective, we came to the conclusion that orbital slices rupture more onion cells, yielding a more oniony aroma. Now this home cooked versus Michelin star fine dice has a similar idea, except it's just on a much smaller scale. We are making the cross cuts for both of these cuts, but the smaller dice does mean that more onion cells have broken up, and additionally, since the onion pieces are so much smaller, that texture is going to be different in the final dish as well. And when asked what the benefit of this in cooking is, here's what Marco said.
When you sweat that, it melts. So if you're making a risotto,
there's no bits of onion in it at all.
And also it releases its flavour better.
Right.
So before we get to the experiments, here's a quick way to start visualizing this. Both of these plates are 15 grams of diced onion and 30 grams of oil. And as we can see, that fine dice is more evenly distributed throughout the plate. And like Marco mentioned, we can expect more flavor molecules to be released, but also the flavors will be more evenly dispersed instead of being concentrated in those larger chunks of onions. So now let's do some experiments and actually taste test some of this stuff to see what kind of difference there actually is. And before we get to the full dish, I wanted to start on a much smaller scale so you could easily replicate these at home and so we can better isolate the variables. First up is a simple flavor test. So to a couple of bowls, I added 15 grams of each variation of the diced onions along with 30 grams of neutral oil, then just gave them a stir and let them sit for 5 minutes. So what exactly are we testing for? Well, as noted in salt, fat, acid, heat, fat coats the tongue, allowing various aromatic compounds to stay in contact with our taste buds for longer periods of time. This intensifies and prolongs our experience of those various flavors. So in theory, the super finely diced and grated onion should have released more of those aromatic compounds. How much of a difference? Well, let's see. So apparently I forgot to turn on my mic while doing this experiment, but in short, I just took a spoonful of each of those onion oils, didn't chew them up. I just wanted to taste for that raw onion flavor and see if I could come up with a difference. And it was honestly pretty easy to tell the difference between the two. Obviously you have the texture, but really that raw onion flavor comes through much more strongly in that finer dice. Now this test is really most applicable towards cold applications. So think like vinaigrettes or burger sauce, for example, macaroni salad. But what I really want to know is what happens when you add heat to the equation, because heat is going to release more flavor molecules from both of them. So is the flavor going to kind of normalize out between the two, or is that superfine dice still going to be magnified? So let's do experiment number 2. I dumped each bowl of the 30 grams of oil and 15 grams of onion into a pan over medium-low heat. Then I let each pan of onion sweat for 2 minutes before transferring just the oil to their respective bowls. And heating or cooking food, as we know, helps release flavor compounds. How noticeable? Let's see. So here we have test number 2, more onion oil. And something super interesting that I didn't know actually was going to happen was this oil with the smaller onions that had the smaller diced onions in it is much cloudier than the one with the larger onion dice. Probably just some little onion particles, flavor molecules, whatever in there, but it'll be super interesting to taste these. And I actually am going to blindfold myself and have my brother hand a couple spoonfuls to me to see what I can pick up on. Using a t-shirt for a blindfold. You can just hand one to me. You spill it? Yeah. Okay, I mean it's oniony. Let me get some water. I got palate cleanse. Oh yeah. I'm definitely thinking that is the small, fine Michelin star dice. Definitely way more oniony. Wow, is that right? Damn. Wow, very different. So this is a super interesting experiment just to do side by side. The only problem is it's on a really small scale, and you can definitely tell differences between the two, but the only problem is onion oil isn't a meal. What I'm much more interested in is how kind of these stack up in a full meal. So let's make some risotto. So I lied about making risotto in that last clip. I was literally just about to make it and I was like, I don't really feel like eating risotto. So I decided to make Diana Kennedy's Mexican rice recipe, which I actually think ended up being a better test subject. I made 2 batches of this Mexican rice, which is very simple. First, you add oil to the pan and fry the rice for a bit. Then in goes tomato, onion, and garlic, and this is where I changed each version. For one batch, I did a large dice for each of the vegetables, and then the other batch, I just did a fine dice for each of the vegetables. And a similar idea is at play here. The finer dice of the vegetable is gonna distribute throughout the rice. So to finish this, add chicken stock and bring to a boil before turning off the heat and let that steam for 20 minutes and serve. Visually, you'll actually notice a difference in color right away, and that's from the diced tomato. But how noticeable is the difference in taste? Hi everybody, so like I said, we did Mexican rice instead because that's what I was in the mood for, but I think this was probably a better example because first, we can see the color difference between these two. Just dicing the onions much finer, kind of let that onion spread out, and that kind of is a good indication of the flavor. It's gonna be more spread out as well, but let's give these a taste test. So first off, glad I made the Mexican rice instead of risotto, really hitting the spot right now. That being said, the differences between these two are pretty obvious. Now, both of them still very good in their own right. Like I would have zero problem eating this. It's very good still. But when you actually taste them side by side, it is pretty interesting just how different they are. For this one, you know, if you get some bites with like the tomato in there, the onion, that bite tastes a little bit more flavored. Whereas with this one, it's so uniformly flavored throughout, and it's also just bursting with more flavor. It's kind of shocking. I actually didn't think it was gonna make quite as big of a difference as it actually did. One is not inherently right or wrong, good, bad, etc. It really depends on what effect you are going to use them for, and that's really gonna be up for you to figure out. So here's my big takeaway from all this experimentation. As home cooks, we need to realize that how we cut our onions or any vegetable can have a large impact on our final dish. And in general, the finer we dice or grate a vegetable, the more cells are crushed up, which will rapidly release more flavor molecules. Before I started learning about cooking, I would always just rough dice an onion and call it a day, regardless of the recipe. But now I think about it. So the next time you grab an onion for a recipe, think about how you want the flavor to release and what texture you want it to have in the dish. Like I mentioned, one is not good or bad, right or wrong. It really just depends, and that's what you need to figure out, which is why I suggest just getting a container of these and trying them out on various things. Naturally, I pickled some of mine, used it in a salad vinaigrette, mixed it with mashed avocado for toast, used it in a chicken marinade, made a burger sauce with it, and also used it for a hot dog. I think we're gonna be doing that from now on. And like I said, it was just fun experimenting and trying out different things. Now, Marco has one more quote in that video clip that I like. He says that perfection is lots of small things done well. And while as a home cook, I'm never after perfection cooking for myself, friends, or family, what I have found though is that good dishes come from understanding the fundamentals, but great dishes come from pairing those fundamentals with several small things done well, just like dicing our onions. So hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Comment down below if you give this onion thing a try, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.